Hello, today is Tuesday, May 7th, 2019. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle larger meeting. Before we go into sort of status updates or feedback from the broader subprojects, I wanted to have a brief discussion about KubeCon because it's coming up pretty fast. First question, which should be like a pretty much non-starter, I think, would be are folks okay with me canceling the next meeting, which is right during the KubeCon timeframe? Be a thumbs up from Justin. All right, I'm just gonna nod my head, and unless there's dissent, I'm gonna go ahead and cancel that meeting. The second topic, which I discussed a couple of times before we get into the status updates, was topics of discussion for KubeCon. Are there things that folks would like to have sort of arranged for us to discuss? If there's interested items that folks want feedback on before we arrive at KubeCon?
I guess there's a meta topic, which is, do we have any, I feel like we have a lot of projects now. Do we have any gaps that we know of that we think are within our remit, but like that we're not addressing? Or are we basically happy with coverage and we just need to continue executing in each branch?
That's a really good question. And Fabrizio took one of my dry erase board topics and actually made awesome slides. I can share my screen here for a second. Where am I looking here? Let me move this over here. Like that. Share. So Fabrizio took that intro session I did and sort of broke it down into slides, sort of to give a better view of the world. There's one other slide that's precursor to that, which actually gives you a better idea. So there's the provisioners, which is like COPS, KubeCorn, other ones. Then there's, etcd ADM, kubeadm, cluster add-ons, component config, and cluster API. One thing that was missing here too is where the image stamping would live. We're kind of creating the KEP for that, but I don't necessarily think that really belongs in cluster API. I think it's kind of like another piece outside of here on this side, which would be like image stamping.
Yeah, like a supporting tool. I don't see any reason to integrate it tightly with cluster API, for example.
I think they're a VIP consumer, right? But I think it should live on its own.
Yes, like it'd be great if there was some spec of what cluster API expected in the image, then it would be great if the image stamper read that. But other than that, they're not embedded in, neither one is embedded in the other.
Yeah, I agree. But does this model make sense for people? Are there things that pieces of the puzzle that folks think are missing here? We could probably use this as discussion point to talk about boundary lines and other stuff too at KubeCon. I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
I know Platform 9 has a piece called Node ADM, which is, I think, I guess that would be sort of part of the image stamper project, which is like, how the question which image stamping is sort of answering is, how do we get an image? How do we get from BIOS, I guess, to kubeadm or to etcd ADM, right? Mm. And I think image stamping is one way and Node ADM is another way. So I guess that is a piece, and I think it is a genuine piece. And but that's the only thing that I'm aware of.
Well, I think that could probably seed a conversation. What I'll probably do is start with this and then start to talk about some of the other key pieces at KubeCon and see where the discussion goes. I'll try to create a list of salient points or issues. One of the things I think is worthy to denote is that I think there's an importance of certain efforts, and I think certain efforts get a lot of line of sight, right, because they're high profile. and other efforts don't get as much visibility. Like, for example, component config, I think it's very fundamental and very important for the project as a whole, for sustainability for the long haul. But like, we got 2 people working on it, or 3 maybe, and we have a very, very large SIG. So maybe trying to bring broader awareness to some of these efforts is part of that too.
I started working on the flag overrides for component config. I have a proposal in the works. But Mike Taufen brought a point that we should probably have this agenda as an agenda item in SIG-Arch, because it's whether if you want to add it to all the components.
If it's consensus, sure. I haven't taken a look at it yet. I do know that we need it, especially for things like the Windows enhancement stuff. So.
Yes, I'm going to share the document when I have it ready with this group as well.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll stop sharing there. I'll use that sort of model as a way for us to sort of guide conversation and talk about key pieces that overlap and start to talk about trying to drive attention towards things we think are important. Next up, unless there's other things that folks want to discuss, because folks are awfully quiet with regards to KubeCon. If not, we can move on and go through the round robin of updates. All right. I'm taking silences. Yes, let's just keep going. Add-ons, Justin or Lee?
I'm here. I don't know if Lee is here, but hey Lee, we did move the slot into the alternate slot this time slot in alternate weeks. And we had a meeting in that slot last Tuesday. We are working on example operators showing the various approaches out there. And last week, I think I presented one using the sort of kube builder and add-ons and declarative pattern. And Lee put up one sometime this week. I don't remember exactly when, but after that meeting, using the operator SDK. So we will likely I hope we will discuss that in the next meeting, which will, in the next meeting, which will be on Tuesday. Yes, that's plenty of time before KubeCon. We also everyone has identified the RBAC permissions as a challenge of the operator model when installing privileged pieces, because the problem is that to create an RBAC role, the operator therefore needs all the permissions of the RBAC role that it is creating, and you end up with these operators with way more permissions than they really directly need. It's not wrong, it's just sort of a little bit annoying, and we're trying to think of ways around that. But yeah, anyway, if anyone has any other approaches that they would like to propose for add-on operators, please do send a PR to the repo, which is Kubernetes SIG /cluster add-on operators. We have one for the kube builder pattern and for the operator SDK pattern. Thank you, Lee. And we'd love to discuss any other options. We're sort of trying to look at all of them in a very concrete way and be sort of systematic about it.
How about post KubeCon? Could we get the hot take readout of what the consensus is?
I think so. I think that would be great. We should have more consensus, I hope, after next week's meeting when we talk about Lee's operator SDK implementation. And and then we should definitely discuss that further at KubeCon. I don't know if we need to discuss it formally because I don't know how many people will be there, so it's a little unfair, but we can certainly hopefully try to get more consensus.
All right. Next up, are there any questions for add-ons? Once, twice, 3 times.
Yeah, I would just like to mention Red Hat has Operator Hub IO, and this RBAC problem that you all mentioned, kind of chicken and egg thing. what we came up with was operator lifecycle manager, which is basically just an open implementation that consumes operator like artifacts and does some of that that initial provisioning stuff to enable the operator to be deployed. So I think that's probably something that could be looked into. It's targeted at the Kubernetes community as a whole. It's not OpenShift specific.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, I think there were some Red Hat people on the call. They didn't mention it. I don't think they had thought there was a solution in there, but I will have another look to see based on your suggestion. Thank you.
Next up, component config. I don't know if I don't see. I'm guessing Lee or somebody from.
Yeah, I can do this update. It's a pretty brief one for the past 2 weeks since we've been working on some other areas. We still need to solidify the API machinery primitives for encoding and decoding. Some of the improvements that are necessary for component config are still open and need to be rebased. The kube controller manager did not have a KEP that made 115 for component config. So that's descoped for this particular release. But Stuart messaged me this morning and he's working on a KEP for that. Obviously, any help and feedback there, it always moves that stuff through the process much quicker. So if anyone is looking and solving some thorny problems with nested config and just in general dealing with the complexity of lots of controllers being hosted by single binary and how to configure that, please find that in the enhancements repo. We already have an open issue with lots of comments there. And then, yeah, we had a discussion this morning. Lubomir had already mentioned previously on this call, but he's going to be starting some work on a flag override proposal to try and get some structure around potentially solving overriding config values using the command line in a generic way that is sensible for users and is something we can support.
I did have a question with regards to logistics or administrivia. In the past, the component config work didn't really have like a curated backlog. Do you have a backlog currently or a project board for execution now?
Yeah, I'll post that in. It's hosted on the top level Kubernetes org.
Cool. So if folks want to get engaged, because we as in VMware might direct some folks in that area, what's an easy way for folks to get engaged?
For one, we do a call every week in the time slot directly before this. It's typically about 30 minutes, and it's pretty intimate. And we could definitely, find something that you'd be interested in working on. We'd love to help some new contributors ramp up into dealing with some of these problems. There are certainly lots of learning opportunities where we're all diving into parts of the code that we've never read before. So
I will be sure to light some candles and
yeah, please join us. It's an important portion of the project for future health Kubernetes as a whole. So.
I think it's fundamental. It's something that's long overdue. So if anyone's ever actually looked at the sheer number of nodes for the API server or the kubelet, it's north of 200, and that's an insane thing to think about. All right, next up, are there any questions for component config? I'll go slower. Going once, twice, 3 times. Next up, cluster API.
Vince, you want to take that since I'm doing notes?
Sure. Let me go through the notes. So the first item on the agenda is kind of a ping to Justin if can help with the release 0.11 for cluster API. Don't think any of us have permission to push to the repo.
Happy to do that. There's also progress on the empowerment, but happy to do 1.1.
Thank you. This will unlock other like issues that we have seen during some demos. Cluster API AWS provider has been released, so there's a 0.21 release, which kind of tests and brings in more reliable creation for multi control plane clusters, and like it also fixed an issue with AWS session, which was not being reused, which caused some pain points with like machine deployments with more than like 2 or 3 nodes.
So Vince, I don't think the session management made it into 0.21.
Oh, so we'll need to release a new one. Yes. Thank you. For the work streams, we have had like kind of been making some progress on like all the work stream across the board for the data model. The goal is to have this week, tomorrow, I believe, like at 9 a.m. There is another meeting. So we will go over the proposal that's linked in the doc and kind of try to lock in functionality and what we want to achieve. Also keeping in mind that like the extension mechanism, it's probably gonna close up before the data model. Chuck, do you have any updates on the extension mechanism?
Yeah, I'm just writing up a proposal based on the working doc right now. I'll send it out to this group later on this week.
Sounds good. And
I would like to chime in on the extension mechanism. I believe in some other meeting we had discussed breaking a machine controller out into its own repository for purposes of doing like a library extension model, similar to what we have today, but less brittle because you don't have to vendor in all the other components. And that does address some of the problems of confusion about how machine set controller and machine controller is the same thing and the actuators are somewhere else. I didn't see that captured in that proposal document. And, you know, I mentioned elsewhere, it's all these various meetings at various times. It's really kind of hard to track the pieces that you want to track. So I just wanted to bring that up here in this meeting. I'd like to see that captured. I personally think that's the best model. And I think I've discussed that previously. I don't know on what meeting, but I think there's at least 1 or 2 other people that seem to agree with my line of thinking on that, and I want to see that get captured there.
So for any kind of like a more like in-depth proposals, like we could follow the new CAP proposal process. I'm not sure like if this should go in the extension mechanism itself. To be honest, the extension mechanism workstream goal is to define what the extension mechanism is, and not necessarily like where the code lives or like anything related to machine controllers.
Yeah, I mean that's it's kind of an end around the extension mechanism, because I don't think there's a need for an extension mechanism because the controller is relatively lightweight from the machine side, and so it doesn't make sense to me to have a machine controller library that does nothing, doing reconciling and just calling endpoints of whatever kind.
So
because it's not really a controller, it's not doing anything functionally. And if we went with the library model, similar to what we have today, where you have a reconcile loop and then you call, you know, various functions that the individual actuator implements, that saves us from having to write a server implementation of some kind per actuator. And I think, you know, just having the assumption that it's going to be hook-based, I don't think that was ever decided. And I brought this up time and time again, like, hey, we've never accepted the proposal for a hook-based implementation for quote-unquote extensions. And we tried to bring that up when we were doing the first goals document. And they were like, yeah, we'll talk about it later. We're not assuming a hook model. And then when we actually get to the document to propose quote-unquote extensions, everything's literally a hook model. And so I just want to like say like, hey, we didn't decide on the hook model yet, and that seems to be the direction that this has already been like laid out.
So I want to table this discussion right now, Michael.
For discussion.
Michael, I'd like to table this discussion right now because it's very CAPI specific. This is the broader SIG meeting where sub-projects report out. I think it's worthwhile to maybe have as a discussion point at the end of this meeting, but I want to make sure we don't usurp like all
Well, in the context of this meeting, then I propose we don't have an extension meeting at all. Like, why do we need an extension?
So you can bring that up with the sub-project owners for CAPI. I think that's fair. And, you know, we're here on the call too. I think the purpose of trying to have separate meetings or breakout sessions was not to conflate the original meeting. I do think that they need to be collapsed. It was basically to have breakout sessions, to have formulated discussions on individual topic areas.
Well,
and
we originally were discussing goals. And then from those goals, we decided to create all these other meetings. And it seems to me that it was already decided that it was going to be hook implemented based on those goals, which, you know, I don't feel like those discussions were done, because if we hadn't decided on a hook, then there'd be no essentially extension like sub-meeting.
So this is where like the proposals come in. You're free to write your own proposal or like, add your ideas to the proposal that we have today. We're trying to push work forward. We're not trying to like kind of close out any other ideas. The proposal can be rejected or like after review. But as Tim mentioned, we should table this discussion for tomorrow's meeting.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile for folks, if you can attend all the meetings, that seems totally fair. But the output of those meetings should be a proposal, right? And their decisions aren't made until the proposals have been merged. So you have every time along the way to raise an issue or to talk about it, or to come up with a counter proposal too. And the purpose of the sub-project is to determine the weight of the larger group within that group to weigh the options that exist there. And I think they've been fair, right? In my opinion, I think it's been a lot of meetings. But at the same time, the goal is to try and get broader engagement and focused discussion on given topic areas. Now, could we refine the process? Sure. I think the intent was, was in the right place. But the goal of those meetings is to collapse eventually, to come out with a proposal and then the meetings are done, right? There should not be an ongoing set of work streams afterwards. And if folks have counter proposals, I recommend talking with those people who are creating the proposals now.
Tim, can I add something? I have been attending both the data model and the extension. The impression I have, and I mentioned that at some of the meeting, is that my impression is in the data model there is a kind of probably unconscious bias, in the sense that it's like some of the decision, like it try to assume implicitly that there are a webhook. And one of the proposals I've been trying to move forward is to decouple that, because I would like to propose controller-based extension mechanism, but that implies some, or will be easier to implement if the data model supports that or not. So I think there is a kind of, I understand the separation, but at the same time, it's like if we separate that, then the data model should be agnostic of the extension mechanisms somehow.
Oh, I firmly believe that there's overlap, right? I think these proposals are not, or the people that are working on the proposals, they're not set in stone until we actually have the conversation, right? And my hope is, and I'm not running the show here on that particular one, I'm kind of passively observing, but I'll help step in where people feel like they need me to step in, is that there's going to be a long time before, or not a long time, but there's going to be a rationalization phase for the actual proposals being up there, and then us having the conversation within the larger CAPI group, decide where the overlaps are and how to rationalize these things.
Yeah, I agree with Pablo on this. It does seem like there's some baked-in set of expectations on the model, and this goes back to the original goals document. It was all about hooks, And I've been adding feedback to the data model documents, and I feel like so far the comments I received in reply have been somewhat dismissive. And so I think the first thing that this project needs to focus on is the data model, because everything stems from there. It doesn't make any sense to discuss extensions and all these other things until the data model is locked down. Now, in the context of having meetings that specifically discuss that individual point, I think that's probably a good idea to have a meeting focused on exactly that. But like Pablo was saying, how can you define an extension model without having the data model locked down?
I think I want to table right here for a second, okay? Like we're kind of running in a circle here. And again, I would like to table this discussion. We can bring it up at the end, which I think is fair. But I did articulate twice now that the purpose is not to come up with a solution. There's going to be rationalization that has to occur, and that's totally fair, right? But I think right now, too, it's not fair for the other people on this call who have broader updates for the entire set of sub-projects that are not just CAPI related, for them to talk about their particular issues. Now, if we want to bring it up at the end, let's go for it. Let's kind of burn through the rest of the agenda and discuss this topic. But we should also bring this up in the CAPI meeting. That's, I think, a proper venue for us to have this discussion.
Well, just pretend I added an item to the agenda that says I wanted to discuss exactly what we're discussing, and now it's part of the agenda.
This is not a discussion meeting. This is an update.
Yeah, release
it's the weekly meeting for the SIG, right? So
yes, but the portion of the call that we're going in right now is to give people who are helping lead or contribute to the diverse group of projects that are administered by this SIG to have a chance to update the community on what's happening.
Yeah.
So we can have a discussion point, but that's not what the purpose of the ritual that we are going through right now is for at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, I think it makes sense in the context of, everybody, discussing each individual sub meeting as they come up, the positives and negatives of other community members about those meetings. I mean, if you just want to push all that discussion to the end, that's fine.
Yeah, I think go ahead.
How about tomorrow? So the audience tomorrow is, I think, the perfect audience for this, right? Because there are some people that should be in that discussion, like Hardik, for example, that aren't, I don't see on the call today. He might be here. I just haven't pretty paged through everyone, but there are a lot of people, and it does feel like it is a good topic, but it is a great topic for tomorrow. And I think if you put it on the agenda for tomorrow, I think we should headline with that agenda.
Yeah, I agree that even if we discussed today, as you said, Justin said, there are a lot of important people. Important, you mean that they are actively working, for instance, in the extension that are not today. So we will have to repeat this discussion. So I agree that.
Yeah, I agree. So I would like to move on with the rest of the agenda, or at least the status updates, and we can have a micro discussion of what will probably be rediscussed again tomorrow with regards to this topic. Does that seem fair, Michael?
Well, it seems like most meetings I attend are about attending other meetings. So, I mean, yeah, let's lock it down for an actual meeting where we actually discuss and decide something somewhere.
Okay. Are there other? You were talking about the extension mechanism. And there were other pieces, the control plane lifecycle and the node lifecycle stuff. Do you want to, I can do the node lifecycle. Who is doing the control plane lifecycle?
The control plane lifecycle is meeting after this meeting for the second meeting, and Hardrick is driving that.
Okay. With regards to node lifecycle, I'm working on a CAP with regards to image building, stamping, minting, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of good feedback and a lot of good discussions. Like we mentioned earlier on, we don't think that this CAPI is potentially a VIP consumer, but they're not, it doesn't necessarily fall underneath that umbrella. So I will paste a link to that proposal, which is totally a mess right now. And my plan is this afternoon to go through it with more detail. And hopefully try and have a focused discussion on that particular one this Friday. and probably collapse the KEP by next meeting. So that way we should no longer have a node lifecycle group, probably by 1 to 2 weeks time frame. All right, next up, are there Kube Spray folks? I've been meaning to reach out to Antoine. Going once, twice. I'll reach out to him asynchronously. Lubomir?
For KubeADM, I wrote some notes in the agenda doc. We merged a PR that was multiple control plane nodes to join concurrently, contributed by a SUSE developer. He also promised that he is going to write some integration tests for that. We merged the PR that allows now to use wildcards for subdomains in CIDRs. We also now have experimental support for renewing certificates automatically during upgrade. This was a general consensus in the KubeADM office hours that we might want to do it, but the support is still experimental and it's kind of unclear how we want to proceed. The work for V1 Beta 2, the config version of KubeADM, has already started. The first PR exposes the certificate key that is used to copy certificates between the primary control plane and secondary control plane nodes that join the cluster. This is the work here is going to continue. We also had a discussion about Windows support in KubeADM, and we have a KEP. The KEP was merged. Later today, I have a meeting with Microsoft and Pivotal developers to discuss some of the pain points and proceed with this work. That's it for KubeADM.
Are there any questions, comments, complaints, concerns for Lubomir? Going once, twice, 3 times. Cops.
Yes, we are. We did our feature bankruptcy thing, and so we have active development happening in the master branch. I think most exciting one is we were using aggregated API servers and the heavy API machinery, and now we are using, or will shortly be using, CRDs, which will also, it's a lot lighter weight. It's a lot lighter dependency on the KK repo, or the various repos, I should say. And then it should also enable us to start using cluster API, at least partially, soon. So fingers crossed. But yes, progress is being made. Sorry.
Would you please add some context to help me understand what the feature bankruptcy is for? Is that so that you can get to a more modern version of Kubernetes, or
a newer version of Kubernetes? Yes. We basically were, I think a member of the community produced a really good graph which showed that our number of days of lag was had gone up to basically approaching 6 months of lag between release of KK and release of the corresponding COPS version. And so what we did was we essentially, I'm foreshadowing my KubeCon talk. We essentially said we will not put any significant new features in COPS 1.12, 1.11, 1.12, 1.13, 1.14. And so master is open for business for 1.15, but 1.12, 1.13, 1.14 should be much more just no new features, just fixes.
That's old stuff now. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're still going to stabilize them, but we are not. We are essentially saying all features jump to the latest, the future release now, as opposed to continually playing catch up, trying to stabilize and add new features, which was just super hard. We have traded off cherry pick hell in return for that. But it seems like a good, at the moment, it seems like a good trade-off. Time will tell.
Any other questions for Justin on COPS? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, next up, Minikube.
Sure. We released 101 last week, which is defaults to Kate's 141. We've got the 1.1 milestone planned for the end of the month with our first stab at language localization and improved support for image mirrors in China and fast restarts. The image mirrors in China, I'm still, we have some good PRs. We're still a little wary about how do we how do we prevent poisoned images from being introduced? Since Kube-ADM pulls by tag, and so we kind of have to trust the tags rather than the digests. So we're looking into ways to still have a good user experience there. And we have 2 new maintainers who will actually, sorry, yeah, it is 1.14.1. Sorry about that. 2 new maintainers, Sharif and Medya, who will actually be in KubeCon EU if you need to bring anyone on stage or have any discussions. So,
with regards to image poisoning, Kube-ADM can pull a SHA-based image. You could do that a while ago.
Yeah, we've talked about actually like hard coding a map for the releases of like, here is the known good SHAs. It gets a little yucky, but that's probably what we'll have to do. I didn't realize that. I see somebody mentions that you can do tag at digest. I will have to, I didn't realize that was a feature, so I will check on that.
I'd say it's also not just, I think poisoning is a loaded term, and it's not just China, right? It's mirrors anywhere. Like a lot of people want to run private mirrors for whatever reason.
Yeah, and so we have a feature right now that somebody's proposed where if you can't get to GCR, that it'll fall back onto a series of mirrors. And I would love that feature, but I'm not comfortable having it as a default until we can have digest verification. So,
opening up that mirror pull to be a usable library could be a valuable thing for the community.
Mm-hmm. It's a good idea.
Thanks for working on that.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things I want to maybe broach as a topic during KubeCon, which will be, just to think about, put it in the percolator, let's not talk about it now, but is the abstraction layer for developer-centric workflows to kind of put, not necessarily all the technology, but to pull that abstraction layer for Minikube, Kind, and Dined into a meat grinder, just so that we have like one unified plane by which a person can kick. The back end can be whatever.
Right.
I don't care. Like right now, consumers are very confused, right? About where one tool ends and the other tool begins, and how to best leverage for their different user story.
Agreed.
That was uncontroversial. We can save that for the face-to-face. etcd, are there any other questions for Minikube? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. etcd ADM, Daniel.
Yeah, unfortunately, not much update. I still have the action items for myself on producing released artifacts. Actually, someone reached out to me, offered help, but yeah, we need to lost contact there, and hopefully get that going. And yeah, I'm still need to work on the organization side and talking with Test Infra on testing. So yeah, just got caught up in some things for the past 2 weeks, but I am planning to actually dedicate most of this afternoon and more time this week to etcd ADM. So that's the update.
All right. Are there any questions for Daniel?
Was etcd ADM a donation from Platform 9?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, but the idea is not just for etcd ADM to be the CLI, which is the current sort of implementation, but also to incorporate the etcd manager code and ideas that Justin has been working on for a while. So to layer it on top of a CLI. So that's the roadmap.
In the fullness of time, it'd be nice to like take out the utilities that everyone kind of re-implements across all these different provider implementations and distill it down so that they can leverage it both as a library and a client tool. That's in the fullness of time, obviously.
Yes, and I've been remiss in not doing my bit of this project, so I apologize. But I think one of the interesting things I want to explore is, Daniel and I've talked a lot about this, is whether from an administrator's point of view, it would be better to do it as a library which would be my natural inclination. But the alternative, which is interesting, is to drive CLI commands so that it's not a magic box. So you can always see the commands that are being run, and you can see that the automation is just doing things that you could do yourself if you wanted to. So when things do sometimes perhaps go wrong, you have like visibility into how the underlying tools work.
I'd love to join a future conversation about that.
Awesome.
There is a meeting. You want to give the deets or a link to the deets, Daniel?
What's that?
There is an ongoing, reoccurring biweekly meeting for etcd ADM. Is that correct?
No. So that there will be. There will be, and yeah, that'll be a perfect place to talk about. Like the CLI versus the library.
All right. Are there any other questions for Daniel? Going once, twice, 3 times. Before we get into the meetings for meetings conversation, are there any other group topics that are quick that we want to get into? Otherwise, for people who aren't interested, they can feel free to drop. Last call for topics. Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, Michael, now is your time.
Sure. Well, I was kind of quiet when we kicked off all the discussions about creating these sub meetings, which I was originally against, but I figured, I'm newer to the project than everybody else, so I'll see how it plays out before I add my opinion to the mix. And so far my takeaways have been that discussion is happening all over the place in various mediums. We've got some kind of discussion board, half the information is captured there. We've got various Google Docs, several ones, meeting docs. It's got some information, proposal docs, and, it's really, getting quite burdensome to try to keep track of the pieces that you care about. And so I don't think it's been particularly effective. And I think we deferred a lot on the goals and non-goals before we kicked off these meetings. And so the pre-assumed patterns that we saw emerging with particularly around webhooks and assumptions into the data model have now basically, come to fruition, which I think, that was a higher level discussion. And it feels like because it's more fragmented now, it's hard to coordinate, ideas, across the different areas, when I think the first thing we should have tackled is the data model. And that's pretty much my thoughts on the landscape right now.
I think the feedback is good to hear. I don't think, you can't, as anyone who's been in any relationship should know, is you can't invalidate somebody's feelings. So your feelings are always, they're heard, and I understand it. I think we need to do a better job of getting things into brass tacks form that people can actually consume. I think that's the next step that people are trying to get towards faster. I think there was an intention of making it parallel, but in making it parallel, it kind of fragmented things, and that's a fair statement to make. I think going forwards, I don't think we should merge KEPs too fast without feedback, and as well as having a sort of detailed discussion, because the problem with some of this work, as you mentioned, is that it overlaps across these separate work streams, especially the data model one. You can't, as you mentioned before, and I agree with you, that you can't do A without B. Like they will, one's going to feed into the other one. So I think what we can do, at least going forwards, is to make sure that people have buy-in for the KEPs that are created, and we have the discussions within the main meeting. We kind of sort of collapse the work streams over time, because the work streams are just a conversation point for us, for those groups to have, ideas and discussions about the different options that exist. But at the end of the day, it has to all collapse down into the main CAPI meeting, and people have to have a discussion.
Well, my feeling on the matter is these sub meetings with these proposal documents, it seems like there's going to be the one best proposal selected out of that meeting, and then that's going to become a KEP, or all the different things proposed in those documents going to become KEPs, or does anything from those documents have to become KEPs? And so at this point, it seems like we're working on an assumption that whatever the consensus is in that document, the Google Doc, that's going to become the KEP. And then it seems like now I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if that is the case, then the KEP is basically just a formalized, acceptance of that one proposal, and that the other proposals aren't necessarily going to be introduced into the broader community. And it also builds the assumption that we have to make a change in one of these areas when, what if we find in the case of the extension mechanism, I don't think really, other than the library model, anything is particularly suitable, and I think we're trading one problem for another. But if I wasn't able to participate in the proposal document, which others may not be because the meetings are taking place at various times and discussions in various locations, that we would move forward with something that really nobody or a minority of people are actually happy with, and basically for the sake of moving forward.
So I was like fair up to a point, but in your conversation piece, you have a bunch of ad hominems, right? So I can call you out on that because it's recorded, right? So I think, like I mentioned before, people have to come back together, and inside of any proposal, there should be the options listed: A versus B versus C versus D. That's actually listed outside every single KEP. So they should actually enumerate the state space of different proposed options that exist. But, like I mentioned before, it should be part of when we collapse back together, and in the main CAPI meeting, that folks should be able to discuss what are the benefits and the tradebacks. And I guarantee you, not everyone's going to be happy, and that's going to be part of the trade-offs that we have to make. And we're not going to come up with some grand design that will meet everybody's needs for all time. We're going to have to make trade-offs with making progress in the interim, and that's okay too. For a lot of these.
Well, let's talk concrete. Like, we have the proposal docs. What is coming out of the proposal doc? Each proposal, or the one proposal that subcommittee likes the most?
The proposal should be of a recommendation that the subcommittee decides, but it should enumerate all of the different options that they looked at, and talk about the positives and negatives that they saw for option A versus B versus C. And it should be very to the point, matter of fact, be like, this one has the most positives versus the most negatives that we saw. And if they're missing something, call them out.
Well, I think it seems then that proposal doc is really like the source of like truth as far as like the KEP. And so it does seem like it's like a 1-to-1 ratio there. Like, you're getting one accepted proposal, and we're going to build a KEP off of whatever that accepted proposal was, and then we're going to vote up or down on that one particular one.
Michael, I have a question, actually. I want to zero in on something. Do you have permission to edit the specific proposal doc you're referring to? Because
I added my proposal to that below the webhook portion.
This is like a separate Google Doc that CAPI was working on at some point?
Yeah, I can cover that. So this is part of the extension mechanism. It was a document just to list out the pros and cons of various ideas that we had, and the webhook / gRPC kind of had the most points added to it. So I thought a proposal from there would be appropriate.
Yeah, so
can I say something? Is that I think that the root of this problem is that I recall the initial the kickoff of this work stream, something that was actually was Jason that mentioned that at some point we would like to explore different extension mechanisms. And again, just to go back to my previous comment, is that I think that we are here in this dilemma is just because we are trying to fit the data model, or maybe unconsciously, but I think that there is what's happening that is kind of make hard to implement more than one extension. If we try to keep the data model a little bit broader, it's a compromise, but probably, as you said, in this point, probably this quick office has the most people interested in. And I have my own proposal, which has not been getting much traction. I admit that it's happening, but I would like to have the chance to implement it. But if the data model doesn't fit, I will never be able to do that. So I will never be to compete, so to speak. So I understand that we can, in this point, move to one proposal, but I only would like the data model doesn't implicitly assume that this is the final extension mechanisms and somehow prevent other mechanisms to be implemented. And that's, I fear, is slightly happening.
So Pablo, I hear your point. Okay, I think it's important to denote that like this is alpha 2, right? This is not GA, right? So if you have a better idea, code talks, right? In the Kubernetes community since Epoch, some people in the community came with code and examples, and that code talked for itself, right? If you have an idea, there's nothing that prevents you from creating a POC to show as an example and helps to prove your point, right? Lucas is case in point for this. Like Lucas can bash out code like nobody's business, right? And he'll come up with an example that says like, here are the reasons why, and here are the salient points behind it. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that. And the purpose of these proposals should enumerate those options. And if you have a counterpoint to make and you come with code like as a concrete example of how to do these things, that will help make your case. Like if you have a really good idea and you feel passionately about it, go forth and present and create an idea. But I think arguing with separate groups, it's only, you can only hypothetically argue about certain points up to a certain point because you need to actually have concrete proof. And the code is, at the end of the day, what we're going to be trying to ship and deliver. Right? So
I agree, that's my point, but it's a data model. There is something that can potentially block, and that happens in the data model. Because if the data model goes in one direction, it's probably almost impossible to implement an alternative model. Then I have the double work of changing the data model, which is going to be probably harder, and then prove my point. I agree with you. I mean, I'm not agreeing with that. That's why I have not been pushing more my idea, because I understand what you said. But my only point is that in the content of the data model, that's the only thing that could probably prevent other alternative models if we are not careful. I'm not saying that this is happening. I'm just saying we should probably be careful not to probably unconsciously bias toward one extension model and prevent, not by purpose, but just making it so hard to implement another model that is pointless, because basically that model doesn't support that. That's not my point, but I agree with you that everything you said. My only point is data model is tricky in that sense.
It's very tricky. Right? Good.
I think that's fair feedback, and I'll go and revisit the proposal a little more so that we don't make assumption. I think the trick for me is like, when we put something in a proposal, it's like a document, living document that like can be changed at any point in time, and nothing is set in stone, and it's not even in a PR yet. So it shouldn't be taken as like the final word or like the source of truth of anything. It's like we're working together towards something, and truthfully, put the extension configuration and registration to be specific there to propose a way for the data model and the webhook or gRPC approach to like a go back in the data model, if that gets us accepted. So let's try to be a little bit more flexible in how we see things, and I think it will benefit everyone.
Yeah, there are some notable generic points that are helpful to just reinforce in behavior. Is we have face-to-face SIG meetings in English during certain time zones. There are people who do not speak English as a first language that work in other time zones. We work in asynchronous and in documented formats so that those people can have inputs. There's several forums where people can get information via mailing lists, GitHub issues, project boards, as well as Slack channels. And there are a lot of habits that are necessary to be a working contributor and even just a community member with stakeholder type input on project progress. It takes a lot of time and effort to pick up those habits with regard to what Michael was talking about with working with lots of different document formats, understanding what's authoritative and what can be edited. And we as members, community members and leaders of different SIG initiatives need to keep in mind that asynchronous input on documents come from many sources, and that we should not get caught up in the inertia of our ideas. So it's a very valuable conversation. Thanks for everyone's input.
I think it's good feedback. I think part of this too is I appreciate Michael and Pablo raising the signal. And I think it's a good signal to get feedback on. I want people to feel empowered that they can talk about hard topics. I do also think that agenda squashing isn't necessarily the best way of going about doing it, but the agenda is open, so you can add your points to group topics as part of the agenda. So I hear you loud and clear. I think there's a meeting tomorrow, because we're going to run out of time here. There's a meeting tomorrow for CAPI. I think that's probably a better place for some of this. I do think that people are trying to do what's in the best interest for the sub-project. I haven't seen people try to be malice. I do think there probably is some level of unconscious bias, and that is a fair supposition because we all have that. But I would also push back on the creation of the KEPs, that they did their due diligence so that the alternative approaches were fully vetted before a choice was made. With that, we only got 1 minute, so I don't really want to go into other deep topics at this point. Was that a fair way of addressing this, and we can take this up again? Pablo, Michael?
Well,
Yeah,
I look forward to discussing it tomorrow, I suppose, with the people that are more interested. I guess this is a broader meeting, so that makes sense.
Okay. All right, we're out of time, so take care, everybody. And if we don't see you, we'll see you at KubeCon, or we'll hopefully see you at KubeCon.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.